Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar panel, Risk, Rhetoric, and Reality, a frank conversation about drone data security. My name is Carl Szabo. I'm Vice President and General Counsel at NetChoice, and we have an amazing lineup for you. We are going to address a number of issues that are being hotly debated. Just read about this issue today in the Wall Street Journal. And it's kind of the intersection between technology and trade relations and foreign politics and security. So it's going to be illustrative. We're going to try to really answer some of the tough questions and really give you guys a good sense of what is going on and what some of the big issues that need to be discussed are. And we've got a great panel. We had one panelist change due to scheduling conflict, but fortunately we were able to find a very willing participant, Michael McLaughlin, who is a research analyst at ITIF, as I like to call it, or the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Joining him is Sam Sachs, who is the Cybersecurity Policy Fellow, New America, and Senior Fellow at the Yale Law School Paul Tsai China Center. And finally, we have Brendan Schulman, who is Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs at DJI, one of the world's leading drone manufacturers. What we're going to do is we are going to skip over bios because I presume you all have access to the internet since this is a webinar. We are going to skip over opening statements because I think we all find them pretty boring. And instead, we're going to just jump right into it. But before we get into the high-level conversation, I did want to take couple of minutes here and begin level setting. And we want to kind of level set on what are drones and what are some of the benefits of drones that you might not think about. I know that it's a term that has a tendency to create a lot of fear sometimes. Some people have described them as flying cameras, other as flying iPads. Brendan, you guys make a lot of drones. How would you describe what a drone is succinctly and some of the less common uses that are just really cool?
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to be here to talk about these important issues. So look, I think at a basic level, and particularly in this era, a drone is a flying camera. And actually I have one of ours right here so you can see it. This is not derived from military equipment. This is essentially a camera that might be similar to the one on your cell phone with propellers that enables the camera to be positioned in 3 dimensions. And what that opens up in terms of applications really is amazing. You can do a search and rescue mission. You can find someone who's lost in the forest. You can do firefighting to understand where's the hot spot, which way is the fire moving in order to not only fight it more efficiently, but protect the safety and lives of the firefighters who are out there doing that. And one of the greatest pieces of news we've seen over the past few years, we started keeping track of how many public reports there are of drones like that one that are out there rescuing people from peril. These are life-threatening situations in some cases. Those missing people, the floods, the fires, avalanche victims, and we're up to 410 people who've been saved using drones like those just from the public news accounts that we've seen. So the number is probably quite higher if we knew about everything the public safety agencies are doing.
Yeah, and some of the other benefits that I've seen, some of my colleagues work at telecommunications companies, and one of the things that your internet goes out, the phone line goes down, or just making sure that a cell tower is actually working, rather than having somebody scale it, you can just send a drone up and check to see if there's damage up there. So keeping people from really injuring themselves and putting themselves in dangerous positions. And just me personally, last 4th of July, back when we could actually, go outside and have parades and go to the pool, I actually used my own drone to take pictures of the gathering, and everyone in the community loved it. So it was fantastic. Michael, have you seen any experiences with drones kind of in the recent news cycles, some of the uses during COVID that kind of surprised you?
Well, yeah, so just the other day, the FAA gave Zipline a waiver to be able to deliver medical supplies during COVID-19. And then even before that, last year, Wake Med in North Carolina was using drones to see if they could deliver lab tests from one location to another faster than ambulances could. So I think kind of what we've mentioned already, I think two of the really main uses we've seen for drones is kind of increasing safety and at the same time increasing efficiency.
Who won the race between the drone and the ambulance?
I'm not sure if they've published the results so far, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be the drones.
Okay. Okay. Well, the drones don't have to worry about, red lights and right-hand turns. So, okay. So it's pretty clear that drones are cool, that drones are useful. But why did everybody come to this webinar? Because I think most everyone pretty much agrees that, like any tool, like a hammer, as I like to think of, it can be used for construction or destruction. So let's get into some of the threats that we're seeing globally. And Sam, I want to bring you into the conversation here. So we're here to talk in part about threats we're seeing from China, and this is kind of your area of specialty. And so what type of threats have you been studying, have you been seeing coming from China on the cybersecurity front?
So I think the key question that's relevant today has to do with data access. What is the ability of the Chinese government to access data from Chinese and from foreign companies as well? There's a myth that it's a data free-for-all in China, that the Chinese government essentially has an open, real-time pipeline to access any and all data held by companies. That some certain things that I've heard said are, there is no such thing as confidential data in China. And I want to break that down a bit, because the reality is much more complicated. Nothing in China is ever black and white, and it doesn't really lend itself to easy sound bites. So real briefly, there's two ways that I like to look at this. One thing that we often hear talked about is Chinese law and regulation. This idea that Chinese law provides authority to the Chinese government, specifically to the security services, to demand access to any data that it wants at any time. So I've spent a lot of time reading Chinese laws, regulations, standards in Chinese, in English. There are a number of laws that are relevant here. I will say there is no specific provision in Chinese law that requires backdoors, that specifically says turn over all your data. What there is, and this is typical of most Chinese law, is very vague, high-level, ambiguous provisions. So just to give you an example, we can talk about the national intelligence law, we can talk about the counterterrorism law, the national security law, the cybersecurity law, not to mention hundreds of standards. We're not going to get into the details of all this, but let me just focus on the key provisions that often come up. So the counterterrorism law has a provision that requires companies to provide what it calls technical assistance and other support to assist in national security investigations. So what exactly does that mean? Could it mean compel you to turn over your data? Sure. Does it necessarily mean that? Not always. And here I think it's really important to focus on two things. Compliance with Chinese security laws is a dance, it's a negotiation. And if you spend any time talking with companies, whether they're multinationals, whether they're Chinese companies, they will tell you about how this negotiation works. And I think oftentimes we forget that local security officials that are charged with enforcing this have significant economic mandates in their jurisdictions. And so it's not always about security, it's also about economic development. And for companies to turn over data to the government oftentimes is not in their commercial interest whatsoever. Whether it's because they're trying to expand globally and this creates mistrust, whether it's because internally data is the crown jewel, this is their commercial IP, and they hold on to that. They don't want to guard, they guard that. So they oftentimes do push back. There's no real-time pipeline. Requests to data are made in a manual fashion. Those requests are reviewed and they're responded to. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking with Chinese tech companies, and what they'll say is, look, we often push back against these requests. We can't come forward and say this publicly, because what that does is it creates a perception that we are resisting our own government. So it's not something they want to advertise. A couple of examples have come out publicly, and we can talk about them, whether it's Alibaba and Tencent refusing to turn over credit data to assist with People's Bank of China, a credit scoring program, whether it's the ride sharing app, Didi. I mean, there are examples that have come up and we can talk about them. I just think it's important to recognize that Chinese tech companies and the government are not always in lockstep. There's much more friction internally than often gets talked about. And so when we hear statements like, well, the companies have to do whatever the government says by law, it's a lot more messy in practice. And that isn't necessarily the case.
And have you seen some of this, not just with data access, but with, you said they don't have backdoors, but have you seen attempts at cybersecurity vulnerabilities and penetrations and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So unauthorized pen tests is certainly an issue. There's a regulation that's a very recent regulation put out by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIIT, which require potentially installing devices at the network level to monitor traffic in data centers. I'm hearing a lot of mixed things about how far this has actually gone as far as implementation. So as with anything in China, it's never black and white. Are there risks? Are there threats? Absolutely. And that's why it's very important to have robust security standards and verification methods that are in place to guard against that.
And some of the skimmers you just talked about, that's for data that is coming in and going out of China, but data that is outside of those networks, that's a different kettle of fish, it sounds like.
So the devices at the network level, that's inside China. That's a inside China data center requirement. And the reason I bring that up is because when people like to reference specific regulations and laws, that is the only one that I have seen to date that gets at the level of specificity of what we're talking about. And it's still very, very new.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, we are talking about China, and so Brendan, you know, we're gonna have a frank discussion. We said that at the outset, so I'm gonna be tough on you. I get to be a moderator and I get to be mean. DJI is headquartered in Shenzhen, China. We just heard from Sam some of the threats. DJI, who founded it? Is it a state-owned enterprise? Let's start with the simple questions.
It is not a state-owned enterprise. The story of the founding of the company is very familiar to anyone who's in the tech space and has followed Silicon Valley startups. Our founder, Frank Wang, started the company in his dorm room. Like myself, he was a model aircraft radio control enthusiast, and he realized if you could make that flight experience, the remote control flight experience, easy and stabilize it and stabilize the camera, you'd have a very powerful aerial image technology initially for movie making, which is sort of the beginning of the company in many respects, was products for cinematography. And so from that origin, in his dorm room in Hong Kong, he set up the company in Shenzhen, which, as I think we all know, is the center of manufacturing for virtually all high-tech devices. So the equipment we're using to make this conference possible today was probably made in Shenzhen, and that's just a reality of the global supply chain when it comes to technology.
And you said that DJI is not a state-owned enterprise, is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, we've got, if you go back to the beginning of the commercial or even recreational drone revolution, about 6 or 7 years ago, you'll see that there was significant, really hundreds of millions of dollars in American venture capital investment in DJI, recognizing the promise of the technology, name brand firms like Excel Partners, Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, and so on. So the history of the company is out there for anyone who wants to learn about it. And we're very much a private company that's still managed by Frank and his management team.
Okay, well, okay, so that was a softball. Sam identified some problems once data comes in and goes out of China. I've read in the newspapers concerns that my drone data is going right back to China. Do drone products from DJI automatically send back data to China? Do they send data to China? How does that work?
There's no automatic data transmission to DJI or to anyone else in China or frankly anywhere. And that's because number one, the drone can be used offline. There's no requirement, unlike a piece of networking technology or a smartphone, which inherently is about communications. The drone is an aerial camera, so you can operate it entirely free of connectivity or any data transfer to the internet. If you want to be connected to the internet, For example, you might want to receive our safety updates on geofencing when there's a temporary flight restriction from the FAA. You can do that, it's useful. But even then, there's no automatic transmission of your flight logs or your photos or your video to us. More so, we've also implemented proactive features that give you an increased level of data assurance. Things like local data mode, in which you're basically putting the drone into the equivalent of an airplane mode on your phone where there's no data transfer. That's done for wireless communication interference on airplanes. Well, you can do a local data mode, basically an airplane mode on the drone, so that there's no communication between the drone software and the outside world. And so there's a robust set of features that anyone who operates a drone would know and can easily be monitored. You can sit there on the line with Wireshark or some other tool and see whether there's data transfer, and clearly you'll see there is no data transfer.
Okay, two more questions, then I want to get to Michael's thoughts on this. But okay, we've heard security. It's in the title of this panel. What do you do to secure your DJI drones? And the second part of that question is, okay, yeah, of course you're going to say it's secure. What testing have you done to verify that?
So the things we've done include what I've described. We also worked very closely with the Department of the Interior at their request to develop a drone that would meet their requirements. In particular, no choice of data transmission to the internet. They wanted to make it impossible for their employees, including either a rogue employee or someone who's just careless, to accidentally transfer data. So even though all of our products have the choice, they didn't want the choice. So we worked with the Department of the Interior to come up with a solution that worked for them. And more broadly, when it comes to your question on testing and validation, that's not something that really is in our hands. That's something that other parties have done. In fact, you've probably seen the news from this week on a recent independent Booz Allen Hamilton study on this question. But that's actually not even news in the sense that it's probably the 5th validation of its kind. We had NOAA do an analysis years ago. There was the Kivu report that was in 2018. Then this DOI analysis, which was done with NASA, with the Department of Homeland Security at the Idaho National Laboratories, and with a commercial private company that also tested it. And now the Booz Allen report, on top of things we've heard from our customers where they tell us we're validating, we're testing your claims so that we have assurance. I can't share those with you specifically, but if you look at it, there's all this evidence that what we've been saying is in fact true. The evidence is no connections or transfers to China or to DJI that are involuntary or surreptitious, and there's no evidence to the contrary, despite all the allegations you've seen from politicians and agencies and others, and in some cases competitors. No evidence, no data that says here's the proof that these things that we're accusing DJI of doing are actually true. And to the contrary, you have a list now of validations that show exactly the opposite.
Yeah, it sounds like you've managed to prove a negative, which is a rare quality. We did include a link to an article about that Booz Allen no news story that you mentioned. DJI still secure, 5 tests later. So that's in the chat to everyone. And our moderators are telling me to remind everyone that a copy of this recording will be available at netchoice.org. So for those of you who want to go back and listen to us all again, it will be there, or send it to your friends. Maybe they want to learn. Okay, so Michael, I wanted to turn to you because you are kind of a master wordsmith when it comes to the issue of what some of us in the industry call techlash. You recently did a paper on that. Can you kind of explain, okay, what is that term? And do you see any components of techlash playing out in the kind of attacks on, let's say, Chinese manufactured drones? Is that part of the techlash that you're seeing, or techlash with regard to drones writ large?
Mm-hmm. So about a year ago, my colleagues and I at ITF wrote a paper on 22 issues of the techlash. So there's a lot of the issues that you hear in the news, things as consumer privacy, exploiting consumers' monopoly power, all of those different things. But as far as when we talk about drones here, I think there's something that first started a while ago, which is something called the privacy panic cycle. And the first concern of drones I think people had was that, hobbyists or their neighbors would be flying drones over their yard and taking pictures of them and invading their privacy. But something we've also noticed with the techlash is a tendency, or the first instinct is to ban a technology. So obviously in most cases, a ban is not a reasoned, well thought out policy, but we've started to see that with technologies such as facial recognition, and specifically with drones, we're starting to see this from, say, a country of origin, that we want to ban technology from a certain country. Obviously, in this instance, it's oftentimes China. And the problem there is it's kind of a distraction from the underlying issue, that if there are concerns about for drone security, whether that drone's made in the United States, in Europe, or in China, and we're distracting from actually creating some sort of cyber strategy that implements a program that we can actually test the security of drones without any point hindering competition.
Yeah, and I myself, I remember the first time I saw a drone, it creeped me out a little bit, right? Oh, what's this drone doing? And it was one of my neighbors flying it, so I went over and asked, "Are you spying on me?" He's like, "No, I didn't even know that you were there, really." He said, "No, I'm just taking a picture of," essentially, it was a landscaping video that he's putting together. But I think that's our natural reaction, right? We sometimes assume the worst, and maybe that's a good thing. But I recognize sometimes it's easier to run and say, I used the example of a hammer earlier, right? It can be used for construction or destruction. Well, let's just outlaw hammers. That's so much easier. But then you're going to lose that construction capability, right? You're going to lose all the good to prevent the bad. So one of the things, Michael, you mentioned was the country. Oh, go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, I was just going to add, since I've been involved in this drone policy stuff for a while now, that you might even call it drone lash, right? So drones have never been a well-loved technology. And when I first got into this, there was concern about drones interfering with airlines and airports, and then the personal backyard privacy issues that Michael raised, and misuse, terrorism, even just personal injury if the drone is flown over a crowd. We've sort of been plagued as an industry with fear that in many cases has resulted in non-risk-based policy proposals to restrict or limit the use and access to the technology, notwithstanding all these great life-saving benefits that we started off talking about. And I just think this is one more thing to be afraid of, like, oh, the drones are now sending data to China. No, they're not, and you can confirm they're not, but now we've got one more reason for drone detractors to try to prevent the use of the technology and to scare people into policies that frankly are not risk-based and don't make sense and hamper life-saving innovation.
By the way, Sam, I've got a question for you coming up. Before we get to that, feel free to ask questions in kind of the question feature in the GoToWebinar panel. They'll come to us and we'll begin going through the Q&A a little bit later in the session. So send them in and we'll get to them. Sam, one of the things that Michael and Brendan just mentioned was kind of this country of origin approach to security. Can you explain what that is and just kind of give us your thoughts about that approach?
This is something I've spent a long time thinking about, because we're seeing a spate of policies come out now, not just on drones, but across different areas of technology, where there are blanket bans focused specifically on country of origin, whether it's a Chinese company, whether it's a Chinese component, or another bad actor. Russia is another one that's often named. So one of the things that I've thought a lot about is going back to this question of risk. If we look at the risk of data being accessed by security services in China, it's not zero. And in fact, it often does happen. So what is the point of discussing the fact that it doesn't necessarily happen if that risk does exist? And the reason that I think it's important to do that is that because we're always weighing trade-offs. And if we want to come up with the most responsive and effective policies that mitigate the downsides of blocking an entire country, or blocking data flows to an entire country, blocking components, shutting down supply chains, we have to think about what the second and third order consequences of that are. And here, when I think about the US and China technology competition, this is a competition that increasingly is not going to be playing out in each other's countries. It's going to be playing out all around the world, in Europe, in India. And here, if the US wants to win that competition, we cannot be in a position where our components, where we're seen as politicizing the supply chain, or we're seen as, whether it's with data flows, and we say, you know what, we're gonna stop all US citizen data at the physical border of the United States. Well, what's gonna happen? The Indian government, which already is weighing very strict data localization rules, which require Indian citizen data to sit on servers in India. And in fact, this did happen after a recent hearing that I testified at in January, where a bill was proposed by Senator Hawley to block Chinese access to US citizen data. Indian lawmakers called up the US government and they said, wait a second, you guys have been lobbying against our data localization provisions for ages. Now, if you're gonna do it, why can't we do it too? So what happens is this sets off a race to the bottom in an environment of sort of data nationalization or data hoarding. And suddenly, US tech companies that need access to novel, large international data sets in order to get ahead on data intensive technologies are in a position where other governments around the world are gonna go, oh, we remember Edward Snowden, we're gonna begin halting our data flows to you. And it's not just data, right? This is also happening in the ongoing Huawei saga, where suddenly sort of the politicization of supply chains, right, and export controls. US semiconductor companies are now being designed out all around the world because, well, we can't rely on having access to that software or that piece of equipment. Let's just go with an Asian or a European vendor instead. So this is why I think we have to take a risk-based approach that doesn't focus on national origin. And look, if we put in place more robust rules for cybersecurity, for data access and retention for all companies, I think that's going to get us closer to being more secure, and then our companies are going to be seen as more trustworthy around the world.
Yeah, Michael, you've done some work on this with regard to cloud computing. Is there like a basis, you think, a framework that we should think about?
Yeah, so when the federal government started adopting cloud computing around 2010, 2011, there was a concern by the agencies about the cybersecurity of the services they were adopting. So what happened was DOD, DHS, and the General Services Administration came together and they created a program called FedRAMP, which is essentially the program that assesses, authorizes, and continuously monitors the security of cloud products and services that the US federal government uses. And what that program does is it categorizes systems as low, moderate, and high impact. And then it has a very specific certain set of controls that, that cloud providers have to implement so they can be authorized. And that's kind of in very contrast to what we're seeing right now to the country of origin approach. We're not saying you have to implement certain controls to be authorized for use. We're just essentially saying we can't use you because you're from X place.
So, I mean, clearly we don't have something like FedRAMP for drones. And as somebody who used to work in the federal government a long time ago, it's a little disconcerting that we don't have this for basically all of our government products, not just cloud computing, but the computers operating in the offices within DC or other government agencies. So perhaps an approach would actually be to take the FedRAMP approach and expand it out to things like drones, to expand it out things like office computers and laptops and stuff like that.
I think you could use the idea of, kind of using, I guess, modeling out the potential threats for drones and then thinking about what are the particular security controls we can implement, whether it's things such as encryption if they are connected to the internet, and implementing those controls and actually having those as a basis for a process. Obviously, there are differences between cloud services and drones, but certainly it's a more thoughtful, a more robust approach. And for things like FedRAMP, we've actually started to see that that's a program that other nations around the world are adopting. So actually, if you go to Canada, one of Canada's government websites, they actually say that they base their cloud security program off the US's program, which is FedRAMP.
It's always nice for us to be a leader on that. I mean, So if we look at what the active legislation that's been introduced, you've got some approaches that basically go with this country of origin approach, which sounds like basically Michael, Sam, Brennan, you think that's the wrong approach. Can you kind of talk about one of you talk about the state of those bills and what would be a way to better move forward?
Well, there's a variety of bills that are all kind of the same impact or intent, which is to either say to federal agencies that you cannot buy or use a drone, and specifically a drone, not other technologies. You can't buy or use a drone if it is made in China or has Chinese components in it. And then some of those proposals include provisions that would restrict grant recipients from using the money or acquiring those same kinds of technologies, the Chinese component made drones. And in the case of the draft executive order that was reported, I think a couple months ago, that would go even one step further and say that you can't even fly over a federally managed piece of property. I guess that would include a post office or a park or something like that, with again one of these drones that happens to contain a Chinese component. So they're all, they're variations on a theme, and I'm not sure that it's worth going in detail on any of those, but they all kind of say the same thing, which is the answer to the concern, if there is a concern, is just to look at where either the drone or the components in the drone are made. And I think, as we just heard, there are other approaches that make sense. Drones are not the first technology where there's been a question of security, and certainly won't be the last. Also, you'd have to ask, why are those proposals only focused on drones? Is there something specific to the drone? And if so, we'd love to hear guidance as a company. Tell us what those requirements and expectations are, because a drone is not cloud services, and a drone is also not a smartphone. So if someone were to articulate to the whole industry, here's what we expect to see in a secure drone solution, and then let's go out and give anyone the ability to build that and test it, that makes a lot of sense in terms of the market, the international issues that Sam was referring to, as well as precedent that we have in the federal government to treat technology in a risk-based way based on what it actually does, not where it's made.
So essentially baseline security standards, kind of like what we've been talking about on a whole host of issues, baseline of something. If you want to do more, great, but we need that baseline, and then you let industry almost compete on who's the most secure, I guess, for the different industries. Sam, did you want to have something to add on to that, or what you think maybe some of these security standards should look like?
I think it's about, again, taking a country of origin, a vendor neutral standpoint. So these are stricter cybersecurity, stricter data privacy standards across the board. And this is somewhat different from drones per se, but if you look at, we've talked a lot about like law enforcement access to data by the Chinese government, but the other side of the risk is just good old fashioned espionage, cyber attacks. And I think this kind of across the board higher level security standard also is a way to guard against that. If you look at, for example, the Equifax hack, widely known to be attributed to Chinese state cyber actors. If Equifax had put in place more stricter security standards, but also retention, how long are we holding that data as well? Then none of that data would have been available to be exploited by a very sophisticated state cyber actor as well. So this just gets at the importance of, let's spend less time playing whack-a-mole with different companies and more time investing in our own getting our own house in order in terms of legislation, in terms of standards.
And it really, if I just add, it really does impact the whole market. So there's this myth that you can just separate the drones that are Chinese from those that aren't. But what we're seeing in terms of the policies at certain agencies already is that all the drones are grounded, because even those that have an American brand name on it are made substantially with Chinese components. So where does that direction end if you just are chasing where things are made? Given the global supply chain for all technologies, again, including the ones we're using right now, it's sort of a never-ending problem to chase where it's made. And I think there's a huge impact on U.S. companies to that approach as well.
You must have been prophetic, because that was actually one of the questions that had come in. So I hope you sufficiently answered that one. Looking at some of the other things that are going on, and kind of going back to my hammer analogy, where it's easier to outlaw the hammer rather than risk it being used to harm somebody. Michael, this seems like a perfect storm, right? You've got techlash plus concern about China and security. How do we get out of this perfect storm? Is it a legislative approach? Is it an industry-led approach? What do you think should help drive the day?
Well, I think we've seen from certain members in Congress a lot of concern about Chinese-made drones and security of drones in general. So I think if that is a concern, we can pass legislation that tells CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to create standards for the drones that the U.S. federal government is going to use, similar to what we've done for cloud computing. I mean, the CISA has come out with guidance on kind of the safe cybersecurity practices for commercial drone systems. Those are things such as using encryption to secure communications if you are connected to a network, transferring data to computers that are not connected to a network, making sure they're not connected at the time, safely installing software, things of those nature. That's just a one-page document that they came out and put out. So it might make sense to have them expand upon that approach, work with some of their other partners in the federal government, whether that is the Department of Defense, things of that nature, and start to formalize that into a program that I don't think doesn't need to be as arduous as, say, the FedRAMP program, but something that can raise the security of all drones that the federal government uses.
Yeah, and we almost do that with almost every other industry, right? Restaurants have to have a certain level of cleanliness, and they have to cook a meat a certain way. We do that with products through the Consumer Product Safety Bureau. So it seems like we're just treating drones differently for some random reason. I did want to get to some of the questions that have come in so far. So the first couple will be to you, Brendan, because there have been some questions about DJI and DJI security. With regard to the flight logs on a DJI drone, where are they stored? Who has access to it? And with the innovation of what's called Flight ID, helping people navigate the airspaces, how do I control that and the connection to the net?
So first of all, the DJI flight logs are stored locally. Now, some users, for convenience or portability, choose to synchronize those. If they do, and they're in the United States, that data is stored at Amazon Web Services servers in the United States. So we're using a U.S. cloud provider for that. But again, that's optional. You can keep the flight logs to yourself if you choose. I think the second part of that question refers to remote ID, which is the federal government initiative that's been ongoing for a few years now, particularly from the FAA, to require all drones, or really almost all drones, to identify who's flying them, basically through a license plate or a serial number type of transmission, as well as information on their location. So actually, it's kind of interesting when we talk about the differences with drones versus other things. The U.S. government wants drones to be publicly identified, including a serial number, where they've been flying, where they are flying, if there's one near your house, which kind of is ironic in light of all the concern about, whether there's someone watching where drones are being used in China. The U.S. government wants to be watching where the drones are flying anyway. And there's this huge question in the remote ID policy arena that is probably a whole topic for another webinar about, to what extent should that data be private? DJI has been asserting since March 2017 in our white paper on remote ID, well before all this intrigue about our security issues, that data is private, it is confidential to the drone user. Our advocacy has been completely and very vocally to protect the privacy interests of the drone users, as well as to protect them against unwarranted or burdensome costs when it comes to solving this remote ID requirement that's coming from the federal government. So we would like that data to be protected. I think it is a really good question that was submitted as to how does drone data become or stay private if the federal government is about to require drone operational data to be made available to the public, as well as to security and law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, that was always something that was interesting because I talked about the first time I saw a drone, it was flying overhead, and I was able to find the person who was flying it, but the idea that I should have been guaranteed that right may seem like a great idea, but then there are the privacy implications of that. Should that person have the freedom to fly it without me knowing that it's them? So that's a great question. For the panel, maybe I'm gonna start with you, Michael, and others can jump in because there's someone in the tech lash. Do you expect American drone laws to become more or less strict with the advancement of drone technology? So Michael, why don't you start with that and then others can jump in.
Well, I would certainly hope they would become less strict, but I think as we've talked about, the direction of the legislation that has happened and the direction of regulations that have come from agencies and agencies' own decisions, that we're not moving in the right direction right now. And I think that's a problem because I think unlike a lot of areas where the United States is frequently leading in innovation, even if you just look at, say, patents, I think in 2017, nearly 80% of the patents on drone innovations came from China. So this is an area where we can improve as a country.
We're going to do one last question, then we'll kind of do final thoughts. Last question came in. It's on country of origin ban. So Sam, I think this would be great for you. Question asks, country of origin ban versus a cybersecurity requirements approach seems to provide a free pass to countries that aren't listed as bad. This would seem to open up security vulnerabilities that bad actors could exploit simply by establishing a company in a quote unquote not bad country.
I think it's the opposite. If a company can't meet a very high bar, then they shouldn't be allowed. If they can, then they can. So, for countries that it seems like implicit in that question is an assumption that countries like China are going to have low cybersecurity practices. And the reality is a lot of Chinese companies notoriously are behind the curve in terms of some of the most mature, sophisticated cybersecurity practices. That's actually why we got the cybersecurity law in China in the first place. It was meant to raise the bar so that Chinese companies would get up to speed and get their act together on cybersecurity. So if standards are put forward and a company can't meet them through a third-party auditor and testing and verification, then they shouldn't be allowed. So I think it's kind of, it creates an opposite incentive. I'll also say that I think if we get into this sort of, if we get into an environment of sort of a internet and data fragmentation, where certain regions are not sharing technology standards, where data is not flowing seamlessly across borders because of this national origin approach, that counterintuitively creates much more sophisticated cybersecurity problems. Think about the process that a company uses to push out software updates and patching. If they can't get those patches and software updates out globally to different countries, to different companies and locations around the world, we're in an environment where patching is happening in a more manual fashion, and then those software updates aren't delivered. So I would actually disagree with sort of the assumption at the basis of the question. That's not how cybersecurity works.
Okay, so I'd like to thank our panel for doing a great job, and I'd like to just kind of go around the circle with some kind of final thoughts. It's going to go Brendan, Sam, Michael. So Michael, you get the most time, so it better be the best thought possible. Brendan, the title of this is Risk, Rhetoric, and Reality, a frank conversation about drone data security. If people had to take away one or two thoughts, what are they?
I think it's really important to think about what's at stake here in these policies, which clearly are driven by the political environment we're in, but I'm not sure there's a lot of appreciation, particularly in the broader government and just operator community, about what drones are doing. So, take, for example, the Department of the Interior, right? We worked with them at their request to produce something that met their standards and it was validated, and that they said would be used in missions involving publicly accessible data. So not even sensitive. And the missions that they were undertaking with that technology were really important to the protection of property and life. And those include fire prevention, firefighting, search and rescue, wildlife conservation missions, and those have been shut down. The entire DOI drone program has been shut down, even though DJI drones are only, I think, 17% of their fleet. And this is still ongoing now. I think we're coming up on 9 months or something. The wildfire season is approaching. One of the amazing applications they developed was to drop these fire-starting chemical balls across the forest to do a prescribed burn. So that's a prevention. And we're seeing that those missions have been shut down. The training missions have been shut down. Yes, there's an exemption for emergencies, but if you're not trained and ready to act in an emergency because your training program is canceled, that's a problem. We've also seen reporting from the New York Times and Politico on the USDA and their use of drones, in which this is what government agencies are saying internally as they discuss these proposals, that these proposed bills would severely impact the establishment of a drone program to carry out mission critical work for the Department of Agriculture, and that those bills overlook all of the security work that's been done by other agencies to actually solve this problem. So what we have at stake is not just theoretical issues of trade and supply chain and what standards could we apply. This is a here and now moment, particularly as things like firefighting season starts up, that are impacting American interests. So I think the important message here is we really need to return to the way we approach problems when it comes to drones in other contexts. So when we think about aviation safety, we take a risk-based approach, right? It's not the case that drones can't fly near an airport. They have to be done safely using risk-based principles, and those are developed by the FAA. So we have some, but not a lot, of drone activity near airports doing important things like aircraft inspection, wildlife mitigation, you name it, firefighting, and so on. Similarly, when it comes to security, this remote ID topic that we touched on, that's an important part of solving security challenges from intentional bad acts that are caused by people using drones. We fully support that. We want that to be successful, but the only way to get there is to understand the nature of the threat and the solution. I don't think security is any different, except that it's sort of cloaked in this intrigue of international politics and foreign relations, and that makes it more difficult even just to have a conversation about what the goal is and what the solutions are. But I hope that people who are observing this discussion and others that we have will come and discuss these issues with us so we can work together, just like we saw in the aviation risk space. Collaboration and solutions really do work, and I hope we can do the same when it comes to cybersecurity.
Excellent. Sam?
I think it's a question of, are we putting the guardrails in the right place? The openness of the U.S. system has traditionally been our greatest strength, our greatest source of innovation. And there's no question that there are times when that openness has been exploited, specifically by China. Let's be frank about it. So the question is, can we have openness with guardrails and put those guardrails in ways that address the threats and actually make us more secure and make us able to maintain our ability to innovate and be prosperous at the same time? There are times when there are bad actors, and we need to take precautions to block access from those bad actors. But let's make sure to use a sort of evidence risk-based approach as we do so.
Excellent. Michael, your brilliant thought that you've had plenty of time to think. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think by 2023, the FAA believes that there's going to be over 800,000 commercial drones flying in the United States. Whether that happens now, I think it's close to that. That's still thousands and hundreds of thousands of drones flying in the United States. And I think this discussion, or the focus by members of our Congress and certain leads of agencies on just the country of origin approach, distracts from that. There are security vulnerabilities or threats with some of the drones. Drones can be both a target or a vector for a cyber attack. And I think we need to spend more time talking about and thinking about, what are those particular vulnerabilities? How can we remediate them? How can we make sure that any agency in the United States government that wants to use a drone, has the security implementations put in place? and instead of and turn down the rhetoric, I should say, of marshaling up concerns that have to do with a singular country and applying that to drone policy.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to speak today. I want to thank our attendees for being a great audience, asking great questions. They didn't interrupt us once, so thank you. Just to remind everyone, a copy of today's recording will be available at netchoice.org, netchoice.org. And thanks again to our great panelists. Look forward to having this conversation go on and continue as we try to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.